and the end. So up to this point, we've been looking in the book of Genesis and the stories, how God created the world, and then some of the characters that were a part of that story in Genesis. And now, this week and next week, well, we'll be preaching next week, we're talking about the end of the story, right? And so when we look at this, the end, this is God really giving us his vision of where he is going with the world. Now, last week we had Vision Sunday here at Hope Church, right? And we talked about what is God's vision for our church. Because you got to know the vision so you understand the mission. It's hard to go on a mission with someone if you don't know the direction they're actually going in with their vision. So today we're going to have kind of like Vision Sunday Part 2. And this is going to be now an expanded version of that vision, and that is the vision that God has, not just for this church, but for the whole world. Eschatology, which is study of the last things, if you break the word down, is important, not so much to try to figure out exactly when is Jesus coming back, or what does this image actually represent in this unique sort of apocalyptic vision that some prophet might have had. But it's important to understand that God is in control of history, and that God is directing history to fulfill his purpose. And 260 times in the New Testament alone, we find specific references to the end times. God really wants us to know what the future looks like, the future he's going to bring about, that he intends for each and every one of us to participate with him in. It's a future where there'll be no more tears. Aren't you glad? It's a future that's got a city and builder whose architect is God himself. A glorious New Jerusalem that is described in the final chapters of the last book of the New Testament, the book of Revelation, which is interestingly described as John, who's the one seeing the vision. He says he saw the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven, which makes me think it's coming to earth. I believe that in the future, heaven and earth will become one, and that we're going to spend an eternity not in the clouds, but right here. I believe that God created the earth for human habitation, and sin has not changed his mind about that. That he still intends for us to live here in new and glorified bodies, resurrection bodies. Now, I know that we'll be able to identify each other in the future when we have resurrection bodies, because the disciples were able to identify Jesus in his resurrection body. But don't be surprised if I'm about 6'2" in the future. Okay? I'm just warning you, it's quite possible that's what I'm going to look like. Right? So we got all kinds of incredible experiences to look forward to. There's going to be this incredible worship service that's going to happen around the throne and the Lamb of God, and every nation, every tribe, every ethnicity is present at this and worshiping. In fact, you and I are part of this story. The Bible is not just about what happened. The Bible is about what's going to happen. And we're in the middle of the drama of the unfolding story of Scripture. You and I are actually going to be at that worship service. And that's why at Hope Church it's so important that we worship. And I love the fact that all different ethnicities are present in a service like this. Because this is a foretaste of what is to come. We are people of the future. We are now already experiencing a little bit of what it will ultimately be. As a witness, that's how you bear witness. What are we bearing witness to? That God's purpose is going to be fulfilled in history. His kingdom, which has already started when Jesus came, and the Spirit was poured out on the day of Pentecost, is going to be brought to its final fulfillment and consummation when he comes again. And so we are people who are future people living in the present, worshiping God in anticipation and bearing witness as we do that of what will happen in the future. That's one of the reasons why in the future men and women are ministering together. Men are not ruling women in eternity. Right? And that's why we believe in men and women ministering side by side now. You can look back and you can say, but in history, in the 2,000 years ago, in the New Testament world, that's a patriarchal society. That's not the future. The future is what God originally intended in the Garden of Eden when they partnered, Adam and Eve partnered, before there was sin, partnered together in fulfilling the mission of ruling and multiplying. Yes, we're going to see that all happen again. And we want to begin now to go on mission with God because we know what the vision looks like. It is glorious. It is wonderful. Now, last week, if you were here, and Laura Lee shared with us about the vision for Hope Church, and she described it as like the Israelites were in the wilderness, right? They've been delivered from Egypt. They're in the wilderness. They're getting ready to go into the promised land. But there's this problem. There's a but. There's these really big people, the descendants of the Anakites, who were viewed as giants in the land. The land was bountiful, and they came back with a report, the spies did, and they said, yes, it is as wonderful as advertised. But there are giants in the land, and we feel like grasshoppers compared to them. And they had to make a choice. So they're going to have faith to believe that God's promise for them when he delivered them from Egypt was to bring them into this promised land, that God would in fact bring about what he had promised. Or were the giants just too much to overcome? Would they choose faith or would they choose fear? That is the choice we're faced with. Because there are giants in the land. There are wars. They're devastating. We see them every day on the news. There are pandemics that last far longer than 2 weeks. And then we'll be over it. There are rising prices that make grocery shopping and filling our gas tanks painful. There are jobs that are on the line. We're not sure if businesses are going to survive. There are all kinds of threats that exist. There are natural disasters at unprecedented rates that make us feel like the environment is in danger, and is the world going to be able to continue? And all the dire warnings that we now hear, we live in a world that is filled with giants. A few weeks ago, I woke up. And everything was spinning. Now, I didn't have a name for what I was experiencing yet. I don't know what it is. It's called vertigo. I discovered as everything was spinning that I couldn't even do something as simple as put one foot in front of the other. Because everything is spinning so fast. That even things that had been simple the day before, like how to walk, I had to crawl to get to the bathroom because it was spinning so fast, and my stomach is starting to hurt, and I'm feeling nauseous. And I had gone to bed the night before with all kinds of ideas of what I was going to do the next day, and then I woke up, and all I had to do was I had to fight with this COVID. And I think sometimes we woke up to COVID, I woke up to vertigo, not COVID. I didn't wake up to COVID too. I guess, I get my giants confused at this point, right? So, but I woke up to vertigo, and I think sometimes what's happened is we've kind of woken up to a vertical world where everything seems like it's just spinning out of control. Like you can't even finish up a pandemic and you already got a war, and you got someone saber rattling with nuclear weapons? Well, the beginning of this is eerily similar to the dictators in the beginnings of the Second World War, the last major conflict we had. And you're like, wow, what's going on? It's a vertical world. And the question is, how do you live in a vertical world? How do you live in the midst of all these giants and threats? You know, on the other side, there's this brilliant promise. There's this wonderful promise that God is saying He's going to bring about, but the immediate future's got lots of threats in it. How to have faith in a vertical world. You know, we looked at the beginnings, this series. We started with the beginning. We started with Genesis, and we started by looking at a world that God created that was good, and then all of a sudden it got infected by this thing called sin. And then things just kind of spun out of control. And there's floods, and there's famines, and there's all kinds of crazy dysfunctional families all throughout the book of Genesis. I went for an MRI to try to figure out why I was having these vertigo attacks, and what they discovered is there was some infection in my inner ear. And he said, oh, that is almost surely what caused the vertigo. It had mostly gone away, but it was lingering on, and there was just enough infection in my ear for me to still feel, even a couple of weeks later, a little dizzy sometimes. And in the same way, I think that the infection of sin has caused us to end up living in this vertical world. And so in the book of Genesis, these people who are living in a messed up world and themselves sometimes are messed up people, doing some almost head-scratching and confusing things. But they all chose one thing. They all chose faith. They're just messed up people living in a messed up world who chose faith, and God can use people like that. They built boats. They kept believing in a promise, even though the child wasn't showing up. And even when life threw them all kinds of strange curves and they found themselves in prison for things they hadn't done, God was still with them. And when it's all said and done, Joseph summarizes the experience of all of these saints in the book of Genesis with a statement, you intended it for evil. The author has put it at the end of the book of Genesis because it's the capstone. It's the way of, this is the final summation of looking back on all that he has written earlier. You intended for evil, but God intended it for good. And what Joseph would say, one thing I've learned from life is in spite of the giants, in spite of the vertical nature of the world we live in, is that God ultimately brings about his purpose. So faith is always the right way to live. Because God is the Lord of history. Even when it seems that everything's spun out of control and people are doing all the wrong stuff, and evil seems to be winning, nonetheless, I will choose, Joseph says, to trust in the Lord because he will bring about his purposes. Now, I just have one passage this morning that I want to actually look at, make some comments maybe about other things that are found in the New Testament. But one passage that I want to look at this morning, and that's found in Matthew chapter 24, and it's the one that we have up here on the screen. It's the one that Lindsay read to us just a few minutes ago. And that is that Jesus is with his disciples, and it's the last week of Jesus' life, and they're looking at the temple. And as they look at the temple, the disciples are just so amazed because it's an incredible architectural genius. In Herod the Great, he had some nasty side effects to him, but he was very good at building. And he had managed to put together and build and restructure this temple and use huge stones that were just so impressive that are still there today. Even once the temple got destroyed by the Romans, they couldn't remove some of them. How he got them there, we still don't know, and the disciples are just amazed at it. And they're looking at this temple complex, and Jesus says to them, he says to them, you see this temple complex, it's not going to be around anymore in the near future. He's saying everything that you think about this temple is the foundation of your religion, and organized religion is going to go away. It's not going to be about brick and mortar in the future, but God's purpose will still be accomplished. But he lets them know that something is coming soon, and that within a generation, the Romans, after a revolt by the Jews, will have destroyed the city of Jerusalem, including the temple. Lets them know you're going to find yourself living in a vertical world. In a world where it seems like things are spinning out of control. So later that day, when they're at the garden, probably the Garden of Gethsemane, it's actually Mount of Olives, but that's where the Garden of Gethsemane is located. That seems to be the place the last week of Jesus' life where he tends to pray with his disciples. They kind of come up to him and they ask him a question about how to live in a vertical world, in a world that seems like it's spinning out of control. And so this is the question that we have this morning. So we could be like leaning in with these disciples. Like, what does Jesus say about the future? What is he going to say about what it's like to live in a world where there are giants and threats, a vertical kind of world? And so Jesus begins to explain to them, starting here in Matthew chapter 24 and verse number 3. As Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples come to him privately and they say, "Tell us, when will this happen and what will the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" Now, one of the things I want you to notice about this question that the disciples ask that I really love, and that is, they say, "What is the sign of your coming?" In other words, our eyes are on you, Jesus. We know that the way we're going to survive a world that is spinning out of control is when we look to you, because you are the one who will come to the rescue. Truth of the scripture is simply this: God's always coming to the rescue. Do you believe this? Every story in the Bible is a story of someone who's in a crisis. God's always coming to the rescue. But do you believe this? It's the question we have to ask ourselves again and again. Do I believe that God really is coming to the rescue? One of the things I found out about having vertigo is, having spinning, it's like crazy. But there's one thing I could do. One thing that would help me with it. And that is if I sat down and I looked straight ahead at one thing. The more I moved around, the more spinning it got. It was crazy. It's like, then I can't hardly walk. I'm like, Lord, we can tell you, I'm like this. I look like a drunken sailor for sure. I was ready to just fall over, bouncing into walls. I'm like, I can't do it. I wanted so much to get things accomplished, and I couldn't. All I could do, I could just sit down and look at one thing. Turns out, this happened right on a Saturday, which was when the NFL playoffs were going to take place. So it's like, all I could do the whole weekend was watch football games. Because, I'd love to help you clean the house. I'd love to do laundry. I'd love to, I wish I could do all this stuff, but I'm just stuck watching football. And they had games, 3 games on Saturday. They even had a game on Monday, and spilled over this is heavenly. This is heavenly. So much, that for moments I actually forgot I had vertigo. But if I got up and started running around, oh boy, it'd be right back. I'd sit down, look at one thing. Everything started to make sense. And I could watch that game. It was horrible. Having sick. Anyways. And that's what we do in a vertical world, right? You sit down and you focus on one thing. This is what the saints did, like we talked about from Genesis, is that and the writer of Hebrews tells us, that they lived their lives by faith. Abraham was looking for a city whose builder and architect is God. And then he summarizes it by saying, so for us, we run our race of faith by fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author perfecter of our faith. So the disciples are doing that. They're like, okay. They're looking for what is the sign of your coming. Your coming. The end of the age. By the way, the end of the age for these disciples, for all the Jews, was the time when God would make things right and he would judge the evil nations that had tormented the people of God, and Israel become the centerpiece of the new world. When is it going to finally get fixed? When is the evil finally going to be over with? When is that going to finally happen? And so Jesus says, okay, he's going to answer this question. And he says, first thing you got to do is you got to watch out that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name claiming, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many. See what happens whenever you feel like you're living in a vertical world? Whatever happens to you when you see the giants that are out there, you feel intimidated and fearful. You start grabbing for answers, even if they are false ones. When I had vertigo, and I read some people have vertigo, it lasts for 15 minutes and then they go on. 2 hours later, I'm still sitting there dry heaving, so that's not working for me. If someone had come up to me and said, hey, I read on the internet that there's a pill you can take. Now, normally, under normal circumstances, I'm like, who would do that? Give me the pill. Like you reach for things in moments of desperation when fear starts to kick in. You start to do things that you normally never do. And so he says, first thing you got to watch out for is when you're living in a vertical world that seems to be spinning out of control, is don't reach for false answers. Because the world will present. And then he says, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. It's interesting to me that it's not just wars. I mean, wars have always existed in human history. It's always been. So in a sense, you might say, how is that a sign? But I always found it fascinating. He says rumors of wars. Now, obviously, it could be that someone might be threatened by the possibility that another war will come. And once you've experienced one and the ravages and the destruction of it, you're scarred, so you are kind of worried that something like that might happen again. But we have never lived at a time where the rumor of war is as threatening as it is today because of nuclear capabilities. So he says there are wars and rumors of wars. And then he says this, but, I love the word but, see to it that you're not alarmed. But when you watch the news, and we read the newspapers, and we're aware of the world in which we're living, fear can easily grip us, and it is gripping a lot of people filled with stress and anxiety at this moment. And Jesus says, now, I know what I'm telling you is going to kind of up your anxiety a little bit, but I want you to know, don't be alarmed. Don't let your hearts be troubled. In another place, in John, he tells his disciples about the difficulties, even persecution they're going to face. And he says, I tell you this in advance. So you're not caught off guard by it. But let not your hearts be troubled. The NLT translates this here where he says, not being alarmed, it says, don't panic. Almost like that. Because that's sometimes what starts to happen to us. We get panicked by things. And that just makes it all worse. Such things must happen. We're living in a sin-infected world. Infection causes this. Sin causes it. But the end is still to come. You might feel like it's here. It's not quite yet here yet. It's getting closer, but it hasn't yet come. In fact, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. We're seeing all kinds of alliances developing right now. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places, natural disasters. Boy, is that happening. At really unprecedented rates. Now, you've always had earthquakes, and you've always had famines, and you've always had wars. All these things have always happened throughout human history, right? It's nothing exactly new. All of this is present in the book of Genesis, in the very beginning that we've been looking at in this series earlier. But here's the real sign. It's not necessarily war. It's not necessarily the earthquakes, because he gets to it in verse 8. All these are the beginning of the birth pains. The beginning of the birth pains. Now, I'm not an expert on giving birth to children. I have to just clarify this because I have an expert sitting right here. I was, how do I put this? I was present 3 times. Right? Yes, let's just, and I have no idea about the pain. I have no idea because I've never had kidney stones. And that's the closest a man can get to understanding the pain, they tell me. Right? I mean, heart surgery, yeah, it was a big deal, but no, it's not the same thing. It's still downgraded, right? So, but I did miss a night's sleep one night, and each one of our children and the birth experiences with these children, what would happen is that the contractions, there's 2 things happened with contractions that indicated the baby was coming. They came closer together, and they got more intense. Those are the 2 things. They come closer together, and they get more intense. So the sign is that when you see wars and famines and natural disasters coming closer together and getting more intense, that's the sign that the end is about to come. It's like we're watching a movie and you're waiting to see when the hero's going to rescue the ones he loves because the evil is going to take him over, and you can feel it's going to happen. The music almost starts to play a little louder, and we're getting all built up because we know the moment's coming, and we know he's going to rescue him. It'd be a crummy movie if he didn't, right? It's like he's going to rescue him. We don't know exactly how. We don't know exactly when. That's what got us tensed up when we're watching. But he is going to rescue him. He's going to come in his white horse. That's what the disciples want to know about. And he's saying, listen, before it comes, the end, it's going to get intense. But that's a sign. That's a sign, not of death, but of life. You think it's a sign of death. Well, the old world is passing away. Yes, that is true. But a new world is coming. And it will be filled with joy. So when our first son was born 30 years ago, we went to the hospital, our first son was going to be born, and I was so excited. And Laura Lee was nervous. I was mostly just excited. So, we already knew the ultrasound. It indicated definitely a boy. He posed a couple times. So we knew he was a boy, And it's like, we're all excited. I get to be, the name's going to carry on, Crabtree. This is so good. And we're in the hospital and we're waiting and the doctor pops in every once in a while. And I'm like, just, hi, and gone. Like, I wonder how much I'm paying this guy. And he's gone, what's the deal with that? But there we are, and I'm all excited, and then all of a sudden, the heart rate of our son drops precipitously. And they're not sure why, but they think, he's got a hold of the umbilical cord, and he's wrapping it around his neck. Now, as it turns out, he is drama to the T. So it doesn't surprise me that he's like, what's this? He's grabbing it and trying to twist it, because that's him. He's that child, right? So he's in there, and all of a sudden there's this emergency that happens, and the doctor comes running into the room, And all of a sudden I understand why he's worth every penny. Because when you're in an emergency, you want to be in the hands of someone who knows exactly how to handle it. This world's an emergency. And I don't think humans know how to handle it. I think they're trying their best. I think the UN does its best. I think all these different organizations do their best. We respect that. But we want to be in the hands of someone who knows exactly what to do. And in a moment I went from, oh no, I thought it was going to be a family, to, am I going to be alone? They rushed my wife off, literally, they rushed her off into this emergency in a matter of minutes because they have no time to waste. There's going to be major surgery being done. And I tried to explain all of this, and my whole world seems to be collapsing around me, and they're trying to put scrubs on me because they said, you can actually go in and kind of see your son still being born. So a nurse is walking me down this hall, and I'm stunned. And we get into the operating table, or in the operating room, and there on that operating table is Laura Lee. And she's completely out. She's not moving. And they've cut her open. And there's blood everywhere. It was one of the most painful moments in my life. What's happened to her? And the next moment, they pull this baby out of her stomach. And my attention shifts from one of the lowest moments in my life to one of the most exciting. You're a dad. He's healthy. Look at him. I helped do that. Wow, this is something, and they kind of clean him up, and they bring him to me, and they're like, I'm looking at him. And they're like, you can touch him. And I take my finger and I'm like, your skin is so soft. Just sit yeah, he's real. You're like, at that point I was so shocked with everything that had just transpired in that moment, But being in the hands of someone who knew exactly what to do made all the difference in the world in that moment of crisis. And Jesus is saying, listen, in these last days, the sign is that the contractions are going to become shorter, closer together. They're going to be more intense. But even though you have to push through the pain, you have to push through the pain of that. Nonetheless, when that baby is laid in the arms of its mother, you don't forget all the pain, but it recedes into the background. Because what matters is new life has been born. This old world dying is not going to be easy necessarily. But what Jesus promises is a new world that is coming. Something is going to be born. And as he describes this future world, this new world that's coming, in fact, has already begun because Jesus has come into the world and the resurrection has already overcome death. And already the Spirit, which has come and the day of Pentecost and now fills us. We have this great anticipation of what this future is going to look like and what we're going to experience. I was having this conversation with someone. I said, if you don't have any hope for the future, there's no way to deal with the pain of the present. Now, I was talking to Jeremiah was reading a book about someone who made it to a concentration camp. Was it Elie Wiesel that you were reading about? You know, and I don't remember where I read this, and maybe in Viktor Frankl or whatever, but he talked about someone who was in this concentration camp, a Jewish individual during World War II, a Nazi concentration camp, and he was given all kinds of false promises by the Nazis that they would let him out, they'd let him out. He was just a model prisoner and everything else, and then he realized that the hopes were all false. He just curled up and gave up and died. And the comment that this writer made was that of the ones who were able to survive were the ones who had real hope. Because when you don't believe the future is good, if you live in a world where you think the future ends in death, if you think the future ends in something that's not positive, it's almost impossible to endure the challenges of living in a giant-filled vertical world. That's why we're Hope Church. There's real hope. Because our eyes, we're going to run this race, but our eyes are fixed on Jesus. And when we're saying that Jesus is going to transform the world and make it new, and someone once said to me, well, that's just you hoping for that. Whoa, wait a minute. I'm asking God to do something he's already done before. Again. The evidence is everywhere that God is able to. This world, this very place in which we're at, he has created this world. And if he can create it with a word, as we studied at the beginning of our series, he can transform it with a word. I have every reason to have confidence that that is exactly what he's going to do. And that we are going to spend an eternity in a world where there is no more tears, where there is wonderful fellowship, where we are fellowshipping with God and each other just like it was in the Garden of Eden. It will be once again restored in the last days. Your future as a person of faith, messed up though you might be, but a person of faith, your future is absolutely amazing. I know there's uncertainty in the present. I know you may be wondering if you're going to have a job in the future. I know you may be worried about health conditions, or how are you going to have enough money to pay that gas bill that's suddenly wiping you out. I know that there are all kinds of questions and challenges that we face in the present in this vertical world in which we live, but understand that your future is securely in the hands of God, and that we can live by faith in the present, knowing we can endure whatever we might face, because we know we have an incredible eternal reward